Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about the limbic system, and we should know most of the limbic system because we've already spoke about the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, hippocampus. So all the structures that we're going to find in like our cerebral cortex and our cerebral hemispheres all have to be interconnected. So we said the thalamus was like our relay station, and our hypothalamus did like a lot of different functions, right? We had the anterior and the posterior region sending different functions to different parts of our body. But now, how do we stimulate all these different functions or all these areas in our brain? They're all interconnected via the limbic system. So now, the limbic, to start, we'll talk about the limbic system. Everyone says the 5 Fs. I don't know. 5 Fs. And what are the 5 Fs? There's feeding, fleeing, so you're running from something. Feeding is like you're hungry or you're not hungry. Fleeing is fight or flight. Well, not flight. It's not fight, it's flight. Fight would be fighting. I don't know. Tongue twisters here. So fleeing is to run. Fighting would be to fight. Feeling, so like you're feeling something. And then fucking, the last one, sexual behaviors. So 5 Fs. Feeding, fleeing, fighting, feeling, and fucking. Okay, so now, there's 4 major parts that we gotta speak about. Or not 4 major parts, but 4 major functions we should speak about. And one is olfaction. Okay, so olfaction is gonna be like our sense of smell. Memory, we know what memory is, like how to remember things. Emotions, and behaviors. Okay, so now, these 4 things, right, these 4 like main goals are gonna lead into our 5 Fs. Okay. Before I get into the 5 Fs, I want to talk about 2 different ways, the anatomy basically of the limbic system. It's broken up into 2 different segments. It's broken up into gray matter and white matter. So the gray matter is over here, which we're going to talk about first. And then this little column coming down is going to be our white matter. It's really not too hard. After we talk about that, I'm going to get into this. You see how I have it like broken up into 4 different sections? 1, 2, 3, 4. I should draw the line for you guys. 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be associated with our 4 different functions. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about the gray matter. And what is gray matter? So gray matter is like different lobes in our brain. What would be different lobes? So we got the hippocampus, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala. I think there's 2 others we're going to get to. But the white matter, these are going to be the tracks, the pathways. So the white matter is basically the tracks or the connections that is connecting the gray matter together. So we'll talk about the gray matter first. And for the gray matter, I have the structures listed down here. We really only have 7 different parts of it that we're going to talk about in this video. So remember in our thalamus video, the thalamus video, we had a structure right here, right? The main structure. The main structure is known as the thalamus. Okay, and we said in the thalamus, or not in the thalamus, it was part of something. So what was it part of? The thalamus was part of the Diencephalon, which is broken down into 4 different structures. We said it was the thalamus, which is going to be in our limbic system. We had the hypothalamus, which is going to be a part of our limbic system. He's right down here. We have the epithalamus, which is also going to be a part of our limbic system. He's going to be a part of our limbic system via something known as the habenula, which we'll talk about later. Habenula. And then the 4th thing, we're going to have the subthalamus, who is not involved as much, but he is a little bit too. So the diencephalon has the 4 main parts that we spoke about multiple times. The first one, the thalamus, right? Okay, so the thalamus is going to be our center of our limbic system function, right? Just in the picture. Now, you see this green structure that looks like a boomerang? Well, what was under the boomerang, right, in our thalamus video was something called the corpus callosum. Okay, so above that is going to be our cingulate gyrus. So our cingulate gyrus, however, is broken into 2 different parts. So why is it broken into 2 different parts? Because the 2 different parts is the bottom layer and the top layer. When they're all connected together, they're known as the limbic lobe. Okay, so we have to add another lobe to our list. We have the frontal lobe, temporal, parietal, occipital. Now we're going to have something known as the limbic lobe. And the limbic lobe is just going to be this boomerang structure. when it's divided into each section, it's going to be known as the cingulate gyrus on top, and then the parahippocampal gyrus on the bottom. Okay, so we remember the cingulate gyrus. We remember this guy receives information from the thalamus in Papa's pathway. We also remember that the hippocampus, right, gave information to the mammillary bodies in Papa's pathway. But where do we think the hippocampus got his information from? He got his information from the parahippocampal gyrus, right? Well, not from the parahippocampal gyrus in particular, but he got his information from the hippocampus. The hippocampus gave his information to the thalamus. Now, or not to the thalamus, I apologize. He gave his information to the mammillary bodies. The mammillary bodies gave the information to the hypothalamus, hypothalamus to the thalamus to the cingulate gyrus. But now, where does the hippocampus receive his info from? He receives it from the parahippocampal gyrus. That's why it's known as parahippocampal gyrus. We're going to talk about that all again. I just wanted to, I don't know, make it like reinstate it. Now, the blue region, right? This is going to be called our Hippocampal Formation. He's divided into 3 different groups. He's divided into a dentate gyrus, which is going to be the first, he's going to be the bottom, or like the most anterior portion. I'm going to name him the first one. This is dentate gyrus. He's going to be afferent. What do I mean by afferent? Afferent means he receives information. Then the subiculum and then the hippocampal proper. These two guys are going to be, these guys are going to be efferent. So we're going to have the subiculum and then the hippocampal proper. Both are going to receive information from the afferent one, which is known as the dentate gyrus. We're going to talk about it again. Just know the hippocampus is broken into 3 different structures. Now, in brown, we have the amygdala. We've spoken about the amygdala before. He's going to be broken into 2 different regions too. He's going to be known as the corticomedial nucleus, which is mainly going to be for olfaction. And then he's going to be broken into the bagiolateral nucleus. We'll talk about that too. What's number 4? The hypothalamus. We spoke about him a lot. The main ones I want to talk about for the limbic system is going to be the mammillary bodies, which this structure right down here, and then the ANS nuclei, so the autonomic nervous system nuclei. What does that control? That controls parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system fibers. Now, number 5, this is the thalamus. This is our peace sign, which we spoke about so many times. The main one we're going to talk about is the anterior nucleus, also known as Papa's circuit. Remember him? And then the medial dorsal nucleus, which is for emotions and behaviors. Okay. Now, in baby blue, we're going to have the septal. And then in this, I don't know, pink-purple region, we're going to have the habenula. The habenula, we said, was part of the epithalamus. So good. Now we have all 7 structures. What are they? Real quick. Limbic lobe was the cingulate gyrus and the parahippocampal gyrus. That was number 1. Number 2 is the hippocampus. Number 3 is the amygdala. Number 4 is the hypothalamus. Number 5 is the thalamus. Number 6 is the septal area. And number 7 is the habenula. Habenula. Cannot pronounce that for some reason. Okay, so that's everything we need to know about the white matter. Now I said, like, all these structures connect, right? This comes over here, connects to the mammillary bodies, up to the thalamus to the cingulate gyrus back down. All these structures are going to connect. They're also going to connect with something up here. What is this guy known as? He's the frontal lobe. The frontal cortex, we could say. Okay, he might even connect to an area down here known as the temporal lobe. Temporal. Where else can they sometimes connect to? Well, the occipital lobe in the back. Occipital. And then what is on top, like kind of on the sides? Parietal lobe. Really not too much, but I'll just write them for the hell of it. These are all our gray matter structures for the limbic system. Let's recall, this is the brainstem. This is the spinal cord. This is the brainstem now, the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. Okay. Now, that's the gray matter. We're going to talk about the white matter next. Okay, so the white matter now is broken into, I broke it into 5 different structures. Where did I get all this from? From the shirt I'm wearing, Ninja Nerd. I basically took his video and like tried to put in my own words. That's how I usually learn, so. I'll put a link in my bio on his video where I learned all this information from to make it easier if you guys don't like the way I talk about it. But let's go through it. We have the white matter first, right? And the white matter is composed of 5 different pathways. It's the memory pathway, and then we're going to have a Striated Terminalis pathway. We're going to have a Striated Medullaris pathway, a medial forebrain bundle, and then we're going to have a Mammulo-Tegmental tract. All right, so we'll talk about that. The memory pathways, right? This is Papa's circuit, right? Papa's nucleus. Now, we're going to talk about it in further detail. I just want to talk about the quick connections. All we need to know, or all the connection we need to know, is that the hippocampus to the septal and to the hypothalamus is connected via something called a fornix. So that's all it is. It's hippocampus to the septal area, or hippocampus to the hypothalamus via the fornix. What part of the hypothalamus? The mammillary bodies. Not bad. Now, the Striated Terminalis pathway, right? There's two different pathways here, actually. And basically all it is saying it's the amygdala going to the septal area or the hypothalamus again. Okay, so this was hippocampus to those two areas. Now we're just going amygdala to those two areas. How are we going to do that? So the amygdala to the septal or the hypothalamus is going to use the Striated Terminalis pathway. Same exact thing. Now, the ventral amygdalo-fugal pathway is a little different. He's also going to connect the amygdala to the septal area and to the hypothalamus, but he's also going to connect it to the thalamus. How? The ventral amygdalo-fugal pathway is also going to connect the amygdala to the septal, to the hypothalamus, and to the medial dorsal nucleus of the thalamus. Okay, that's that one. Now number 3, the Striated Medullaris thalami, or the mammillothalamic tract. Okay, what is this doing? This is basically connecting the mammillary bodies to where? To the nucleus of the thalamus. The mammillothalamic tract goes from the hypothalamus to the anterior nucleus of the thalamus. Okay. The Striated Medullaris thalami connects what? He's connecting the septal area to the habenula. So septal area to the habenula. Okay. Next one. Medial forebrain bundle. So he's coming from where? He's going to come from the prefrontal cortex. From the prefrontal cortex, he's going to go to the hypothalamus, preferably the lateral hypothalamus. From the lateral hypothalamus, he's going to go to the reticular formation. That's all this bundle is. Medial forebrain bundle goes prefrontal cortex, hypothalamus to reticular formation. Now, the next two tracts, or the next one is the Mammulo-Tegmental tract and the mammillary peduncles. Okay, they're using the same structures. They're coming from the hypothalamus, and they're coming from something known as the, what? Ventral tegmental area. This ventral tegmental area has got a lot of dopamine in it, so there's a lot of dopaminergic fibers, which we'll get to. But if you're going from the hypothalamus to the ventral tegmental area, you're using the Mammulo-Tegmental tract. Okay? Now, if you're going from the ventral tegmental area to the hypothalamus, it's called mammillary peduncles. I don't know, I didn't come up with it, but that's how it goes. So now, that's everything you need to know about the gray matter and the white matter, and just basic anatomy of it. Now I'm just going to talk about the 4 functions, the olfaction, memory, emotions, and behaviors, to talk about the 5 Fs, feeding, fleeing, fighting, feeling, and fucking. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so now the 4 different areas. We have olfaction, memory, emotions, and behaviors. Notice how I have it. I have olfaction broken up into a zone, memory broken up into a zone, and then emotions and behaviors into they're kind of in the same component. Why? Because these guys kind of work hand in hand. How? So if you're in a bad mood, you're going to show poor emotions. That's going to be your emotion, your behavior. Say you're very motivated to do something, right? You're going to have a very positive emotion. They work hand in hand, that's why I did that. So now the first one is olfaction, right? Olfaction is for smell. What is the smell pathway? So we're sniffing something, right? Sniff the thing. It goes to the olfactory epithelial cells in the nasal cavity, which target cranial nerve 1. What is cranial nerve 1? Olfactory nerve. Olfactory nerve then goes to the cribriform plate. Where is the cribriform plate located? Kind of the ethmoid bone in the nose. From the cribriform plate, it's going to travel into this region, right? The brown one. This is known as the olfactory bulb. From the olfactory bulb, action potentials are going to get sent down, and where are they going to travel? They're going to travel 2 ways. They're going to either travel, say we're traveling to both sides, right, of the nose. Say we're staying on the ipsilateral side. If we stay on the ipsilateral side, it's known as the lateral olfactory striatum. if we go contralateral, like medial, it's going to be known as the medial olfactory striae. But for the most part, the most important one is going lateral, the lateral olfactory striae. All this lateral olfactory striae does is target two things. He targets this green region and this brown region. What did we say the green region was before? Well, this was part of the limbic lobe. And what part in particular? The para-hippocampal gyrus. So if it's part of the para-hippocampal gyrus, it's used for what? Memory. Memory of what? Memory of our smells. Cool. Now, this brown region, the circle, is known as the amygdala. He's going to be known as what? The amygdala is used for emotions. Emotions for what? Emotions related to smells. Cool. That's everything we know about everything we need to know about olfaction. Now, what about memory or learning, right? The main circuit we use is Papa's circuit. I spoke about this one in the hypothalamus video, so I'm going to go quick. In the thalamus video. So I'm going to go quick with it. So it basically goes into 6 different regions. It goes from the hippocampus to the fornix to the mammillary bodies to the anterior nucleus of the thalamus, cingulate gyrus to the back to the hippocampus into the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. I'll explain how. So first, where's our starting point? Our starting point is going to be the subiculum or the hippocampal proper, right? These were what? Efferent fibers. We spoke about them. These efferent fibers are going to travel along a pathway to this region right here. That region is known as the mammillary bodies. How are they traveling? They're traveling through something known as the fornix. The fornix is the pathway. He goes above the thalamus. Now, from the mammillary bodies, which are in the hypothalamus, they're going to travel to the thalamus. Okay, what region of the thalamus? They're going to travel to the anterior nucleus of the thalamus, so the anterior part. What is this tract called that they're traveling through? It's known as the mammillary thalamic tract. So mammillary region, so the mammillary bodies, to the thalamus, mammillary thalamic tract. Makes sense. Now, from the anterior nucleus of the thalamus, they're going to travel up into the cingulate gyrus. What part? What is they traveling into? They're really traveling into the limbic lobe, in particular, the cingulate gyrus. Now, from the cingulate gyrus, they could go one or two ways. The one way they could go is to the prefrontal cortex, and they go to the prefrontal cortex to control our, behavior, so we're not acting out, stuff like that. For memories. Another way it could go is down through the para-hippocampal gyrus. So it stays in the limbic lobe, but it travels to the para-hippocampal gyrus. What is this guy used for? Well, all he's going to do is send information to the dentate gyrus. What pathway sends the information from the para-hippocampal gyrus to the dentate gyrus? It's going to be known as the entorhinal complex, or cortex. The entorhinal cortex sends the information to the dentate gyrus. What is the dentate gyrus known as? Well, he's the receiving, so he's a what? Afferent. Afferent fibers. Afferent receives. He then sends information to the hippocampal proper and the subiculum of the hippocampus. These are efferent. They receive. They travel to the place. So the afferent receives it, gives it to the hippocampal proper and subiculum, goes to the fornix, and the whole process starts again. That's why it's known as Papa's circuit. Just keeps flowing and flowing and flowing. Good. Now the last one we're going to talk about is the emotions and behaviors. So emotions are like, you got fear, anger, rage, sadness, joy, excitement, normal emotions. And then behaviors are feeding, sexual, and motivational behaviors. Okay, so how do we get these things? How do these behaviors even happen? How do we control it? Okay, so in the middle here we have something called the amygdala, which we spoke about. And the amygdala does what? It sends information to the hypothalamus and to the septal area. How does it do that? This pathway right here, the striated terminalis pathway, which we spoke about. So through the striae, let me write striated terminalis. We're sending information from the amygdala to the hypothalamus and the septal area. Now, where does the amygdala get this information from? It gets it from 3 main sites. It gets it from the prefrontal cortex, which is for control, like our emotions and stuff so we don't go crazy. It gets it from the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe has smell, taste, visceral sensations from the insula, and it also has auditory associations. So the temporal lobe is going to send information to the amygdala. What else? The posterior association area. What is this going to have? It's going to have somatosensory association cortex. It's going to have our visual association cortex. And it's going to have our auditory association cortex. All of these cortexes are sending information to the amygdala. From the amygdala, we go where? Hypothalamus or septal area. Now, first, for feeding, right? One of the main ones, feeding. We're going to do it right here. The behaviors, these three, we're going to talk about them right now. 1, 2, 3. So, feeding 1, sexual 2, motivation 3. Cool. 1, feeding, right? Amygdala sends information to the hypothalamus. Now, if you're full, right, and you're satisfied, it's going to send information to the ventral median nucleus of the hypothalamus. And he's just going to target your satiety centers and say, I'm chilling, I'm good, not hungry. Now, if you're starving, your amygdala is going to send information to the lateral hypothalamic nucleus. Okay, he's going to say, I'm hungry. Cool. Now, what about for sexual behaviors? How is this going to work? The amygdala is going to go to the hypothalamus, and he's going to send information to 2 different regions of the hypothalamus. One region is known as the paraventricular nucleus. This one, right, releases oxytocin. In females, what does oxytocin do? It helps with breastfeeding. It helps release milk. In males, it helps with sex drive and stimulates orgasms. Now, another way is the medial preoptic nucleus from the hypothalamus. He releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which then, in males, starts to stimulate testosterone, so it helps increase your sex drive. Now, number 3, emotions, right? This is our brainstem, here's our cerebral hemispheres, right? Not the best drawing, but it's just something to talk about. The amygdala goes to the septal association area, or the septal area, or the hypothalamus. From those 2 areas, it's going to target this area in red. This is known as our ventral tegmental area, also known as our dopamine releasing area, right? It releases a lot of dopamine. So, this area in red, I just have it here, goes 2 different ways. It can go to the nucleus accumbens, or it can go to the prefrontal cortex. If it goes to the nucleus accumbens, right, it travels via the Mesolimbic pathway. Okay? If it goes to the prefrontal cortex, it goes through the Mesocortical pathway. What's the importance of these things? So, since dopamine is released, say like you're taking drugs, right, you release a lot of dopamine. Dopamine is going to be sent to these 2 areas. These 2 areas are going to be associated with rewards. So it's going to make you feel good. It's going to make you feel happy. So you're going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Another area that's involved with this is the habenulum, which we spoke about. That's in coordination with the septal association area, or the septal area. Now, that's the 3 ways the behaviors are triggered. What about the emotions? The emotions are really not too bad. Now, you're scared, right? You're fearful. You have to run away from a bear. You're in a sympathetic response, right? So the amygdala is going to send the fear to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is like, why are we scared? Hypothalamus sends something one way actually, let's do the purple way first. It sends stuff to the corticotropin releasing hormone. That's what it releases, I'm sorry. When it releases the corticotropin releasing hormone, it then targets ACTH. ACTH then releases cortisol. Cortisol is like, yo, we're stressed. Now, if we're stressed, the hypothalamus is like, oh, you're scared, so we're stressed? Fine. I'm going to send fibers down via the posterior hypothalamic nucleus, and I'm going to target 4 main things, right? 4 big regions. I'm going to target the liver. Why would I target the liver? I want to increase glucose production so I have more energy to run away from the bear. The heart, I want to increase blood flow so I have more blood to our skeletal muscles. Blood pressure, I want to increase the blood pressure so what? The blood goes faster and faster, delivers more and more oxygen. And then the lungs, why the lungs? So I could breathe more, I could get more and more oxygen so I could keep running away from the bear. Now, that's how our stress response or our fear response is released from the amygdala. Now there's 2 main disorders I think we should talk about. The first one is known as Wernicke's encephalopathy. All this one is, he targets our mammillary bodies. So, if he targets, well, where does he come from? He comes from a B1 vitamin deficiency, mainly in like alcoholics. Also known as what? Korsakoff syndrome. We spoke about him. However, he targets these mammillary bodies, And what do these mammillary bodies do? Well, they send information to the anterior thalamus, which then goes to Cingulate Gyrus, down to the Hippocampal Gyrus, back into the hippocampus. If this is damaged, what's going to occur? We're going to have confabulation, right? So what is this? It's just making up our memory. It's like we can't remember everything perfectly. We can remember something, so we have to build a story in our head. It also could damage our middle cerebellar peduncles, so we're going to get ataxia. And then it could also damage our ophthalmoplegia, or no, cranial nerve 6, our abducens nerve, and it's going to lead to ophthalmoplegia. Okay, so that's if you damage the mammillary bodies. Now, what about Kluver-Bucy, right? This guy, all he's going to do, he's going to damage this region that we spoke about. So, he damages mainly the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe was used for what? The medial temporal lobe was for episodic memory. Also, this temporal lobe stores what? The amygdala. So if we damage the amygdala, that's what this syndrome is, Kluver-Bucy. We're going to have no responses to emotion, so we're going to be like, eh. We're going to have hyperphagia, so we're always going to be hungry, because we're stimulating which one? We're stimulating the lateral hypothalamic nucleus. We're not stimulating the satiety center. We're going to have hypersexual behavior, so we're going to be very turned on all the time. And then we're also going to have amnesia, so we're going to also damage the hippocampus a little bit. So, that's basically it. That's everything we know about the limbic system. We'll do a couple practice questions to restate everything, but I hope it helped. Alright, so I'll do some quick questions. A 63-year-old homeless woman is brought to the ED by police because she is disoriented and confused. On questioning, the patient frequently forgets what she has been asked. Okay, so she's forgetful. She provides seemingly plausible details of the event prior to her coming to the hospital. But her accounts are entirely inconsistent with the police report. Okay, so it looks like she has some sort of confabulation. On physical examination, she is emaciated, smells of alcohol. So alcoholics usually have B1 deficiency. Nystagmus, and unsteady gait. So ataxia. And okay, so what are these findings consistent with? Well, let me mention what is nystagmus before I go on. It's the unsteady movement of the eyes. Okay, so what are all these findings consistent with? Well, this is Korsakoff's, right? Vitamin B1. They're all consistent with that. We said there was a specific lobe that gets, or a specific area of our brain that gets damaged causes Korsakoff syndrome. Was it the amygdala? No. What was this guy used for? Well, he was used for basically a lot of our emotions, right? And he sent a lot of control. If he was damaged, he had hypersexuality. Not hyper hungry, but very hungry. I just tried hyper hungry. Right? So that's not him. So he's wrong. Basal ganglia. Well, this has to do with Parkinson's disease with dopamine. So this is probably not right. What about the hippocampus? Well, this is memory. So this possibly could be the answer, but how is this memory affected? Is it affected with alcohol? Yes. What about what area is broken though in this region? Well, mainly the hypothalamus is what's responsible for the memory. So we're going to say maybe. What about the lateral geniculate nuclei? This was for light, so this is not right. Mammillary bodies. Well, this was part of the hypothalamus involved in what? Papa's circuit, which then helped with the hippocampus for memory. And if we remember it, when he was damaged, what occurred? Well, we had this syndrome. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be our answer. What about the medial geniculate nuclei? Well, he was for, what, music. So this was the ears. Lateral geniculate was light, so he was the eyes. I should have wrote eyes, sorry. That's wrong. And the superior temporal gyrus. Superior temporal gyrus is used for the auditory cortex. So this is also hearing. So is that right? No, this is wrong. So our main guy is what? Or the main two is the hippocampus or the mammillary bodies. However, damage to the Papa's circuit leads to
all these different syndromes, particularly in the mammillary bodies. So E is going to be our answer. Let's make sure. Yes. Chronic alcohol, thiamine deficiency, so that's vitamin B1. Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Memory problems, confusion, which we said was confabulation. Nystagmus was with the eyes. Unsteady gait, we said was ataxia. Okay. Now, number 2, a researcher is conducting a study to assess the effects of different limbic system lesions in mice. All right, so we're doing different limbic systems. Why did that happen? Trying to just get the highlighter. That's all I'm asking for here. Just asking for the highlighter. Okay. Different limbic lesions. The researcher induces bilateral lesions of the structures of the medial temporal lobe. Okay, so lesions on both sides that make up the limbic system. Cool. These mice with these lesions are unable to learn pathways through new mazes and are unable to recall their new food dispenser. Okay, so this is something to do with memory, and it's on both sides. Okay, and it's in the medial temporal lobe. Okay, so now is the amygdala. Is this the answer? This was emotions, so this helps with memory, but not what we're looking for, right? No. Cingulate gyrus, this is in Papa's circuit, so this is potential, but we'll see. Hippocampus, well, this is everything to do with memory. This is everything to learn the new pathways, and this is also in the medial temporal lobe. So I'm thinking this is our answer, but we'll keep going. Lateral genicular nucleus, this is light. This is for what? Eyes, so no. Mammillary bodies, well, maybe, but usually this involved more than just learning. This also has ataxia. This also consists with what? We spoke about it before. Confabulation. Nystagmus. Right? All these different problems. If it was just learning, then yeah, maybe it could be. Well, if it involved all these 3 things and it wasn't just learning, then yeah, maybe it could be the mammillary bodies. But it involved more than just that, so that's not... Suprachiasmatic nucleus, well, this is for our pineal gland. For what? Pineal gland for our circadian rhythm. So, no. Now, the only thing that it could be is the hippocampus. The cingulate gyrus, I don't really think this is part of it. I mean, yeah, he goes from cingulate gyrus to the parahippocampal nucleus to the hippocampus. But the ultimate goal is to learn and store new memory, and that is directly coming from the hippocampus. So our answer's got to be C. Let's see. Yes. Hippocampus is in the medial temporal lobe, functions to form new memories as part of the limbic system. Bilateral lesions, those anterograde amnesia, and short-term memory dysfunction. Cool. One more. An 89-year-old man presents for evaluation of behavioral changes. So something's wrong. His behavior's messed up. Something could be with the amygdala. Something could be probably with the amygdala, right? With emotions and behaviors. Maybe the septal area and maybe the hypothalamus, but we'll keep going. Okay, his children report the patient was reserved and good-natured, but has exhibited lewd behavior over the past year. Let's see what type of behaviors. Inappropriate comments to several church members, so maybe something sexual or gruesome. Recent family gathering, he tried to put toy blocks in his mouth, so he's acting like a baby. His history is notable for 2 strokes over the last year. Physical exam reveals weakness in the left arm, mild dysarthria, and gait unsteadiness. Okay, testing of primitive reflexes is negative. Okay, so what are we looking for? Probably something wrong with the behavioral changes. Now, what was the main gray nucleus or gray matter that we talked about for behavior? Well, was it the frontal lobe? Well, this was part of our behavior. Was it the mammillary bodies? This is memory, so no. Was it the right parietal lobe? No. We never even spoke about this. Arcuate fasciculus, never spoke about that. It could just be the bilateral amygdala or the frontal lobe. Now, the amygdala sends information to the septal area and hypothalamus. The frontal lobe sends the information to the amygdala. So yeah, if the frontal lobe is damaged, it could affect behavior, but I'm pretty sure it's the amygdala Because if you damage the amygdala directly, it responds to hypersexuality. That could be the inappropriate comment. Toys in the mouth. I'm thinking this is the constant hunger that we spoke about. Right? And, you know, lewd behavior, like really no emotion. So I think it's got to be damage to the amygdala, bilateral amygdala. This was our Kluver-Bucy syndrome, which we spoke about. Hypersexuality, hyperorality, so trying to eat more, trying to have sex more, disinhibited behavior. Rare impairment that is associated with bilateral lesions of the amygdala. So that's everything for the limbic system. I mean, there wasn't too many questions, but I think we got a good understanding of it, and well, I hope this helped.